The US national debt just hit $37 trillion, dollars, and it's growing at a faster rate than ever before. Today on the Continuum, we're going to talk about the history of countries who have had massive debts and what has happened to those countries and empires. This is the Continuum. In the 16th century, Spain stood as the master of half of the known world, from the mine of Portosí in the Andes to the Spice Islands of the Pacific. Its dominion spanned oceans. Silver galleons, heavy with treasure, crossed the Atlantic to Seville. The court of the Habsburg kings glittered with gold leaf, fine silks, and jeweled crowns. Poets sang of Spain's greatness. Envoys from across Europe bent the knee before its monarch. But behind the majesty, an invisible rot was spreading, an economic sickness that would erupt into crisis, after crisis, after crisis. This is the story of how the richest empire in the world became a serial bankrupt. Not once, not twice, but 7 times in less than a century. Before the discovery of the Americas, Spain was a modest European kingdom. Its economy relied on wool exports, small scale farming, and local craft production. Castile and Aragon, who had recently been united, and the Reconquista had drained much of the treasury. The population was largely rural, peasants tilling small plots, artisans producing goods for local consumption, and a nobility who viewed commerce as beneath their dignity. Wealth was tied to land and title, not industry. When Christopher Columbus returned in 1493, bringing news of the islands and gold, Spain's horizons and its ambitions exploded. Over the next decade, conquest opened rivers of silver from the New World. Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, inherited not just Spain, but vast territories across Europe. He was locked in constant rivalry with France, the Ottomans, and the rebellious German princes. Wars were not optional, they were the cost of survival and prestige. But Charles faced a problem. Spain's tax base was too small to fund them. Raising taxes risked rebellion among the Spanish parliament, and the nobility resisted any direct levies on their wealth. So Charles turned to foreign credit. Italian and German bankers, especially the Frugers of Augsburg and the Genoese financiers, became the empire's lifeline. They advanced millions of ducats to be repaid from future silver shipments. On paper, it was brilliant. The bankers got a high return, the crown got instant cash, and the wars could be fought without new taxes. In reality, it was a trap. By mid century, Spain's debt had ballooned. The cost of the wars in Italy, the Low Countries, and against the Ottomans outpaced even the richest silver convoys. In 1557, Philip II, Charles's son, declared the empire unable to pay its bills. The crown suspended payments on all short term loans, converting them into long term bonds with lower interest. This first bankruptcy shocked Europe. It was the first time a great power had openly defaulted on its debt. The Genoese bankers were furious, but they renegotiated the terms. Spain's wars continued, but something had to change. The empire had crossed a line, and lenders now demanded higher interest for greater risk. But the bankruptcies came faster. 1575, the 8 Years' War in the Netherlands was bleeding the treasury dry. When Philip II suspended payments again, the Genoese bankers retaliated by cutting off credit. Without funds, the Spanish army in the Netherlands mutinied and sacked the city of Antwerp in the infamous Spanish Fury. 1596. Now, fighting France, England, and the Dutch simultaneously, Spain's revenue collapsed. Another bankruptcy followed. 1607. Interest payments consumed most of the empire's income. The crown defaulted yet again. Each bankruptcy meant harsher terms from lenders, higher interest rates, and more of Spain's future silver mortgaged before it even left the Americas. Its credit shattered. Silver made Spain rich, but it was a dangerous wealth. The flood of bullion caused massive inflation. The price revolution of the 16th century, prices quadrupled in a century. Spain's economy, rather than adapting, withered. Why make clothes in Castile when finer, cheaper woolen could be bought from England? Why invest in Spain's shipyards when the Dutch ones were faster and cheaper? The silver paid for imports, feeding the industries of other nations, while hollowing out Spain's own. By the 17th century, Spain imported most of its goods, exporting little but precious metals. The common people bore the brunt of the burden. Peasants abandoned farms to escape crushing rents and taxes. Urban workers saw wages stagnate as food and clothing prices soared. The nobility avoided taxation almost entirely, the clergy owning vast tax exempt lands. The crown squeezed what it could from the poor and middle classes, deepening inequality. By 1620s, famine and plague struck, wiping out hundreds of thousands. In Catalonia and Portugal, discontent boiled over into rebellion. 1627, Spain defaulted yet again, this time unable to pay even the reduced interest rates on restructured debt. 1647, the strain of the 30 Years' War and revolts at home broke the treasury completely. 1653, the final Habsburg bankruptcy marked the end of Spain's time as Europe's preeminent power. By now, leaders demanded control over Spain's customs revenue as security. The empire had officially mortgaged off its sovereignty. In the century after Columbus, Spain had transformed from a modest kingdom to a globe-spanning empire. Yet, within the same century, it had become a cautious tale, a lesson in the dangers of relying on unstable wealth and endless borrowing. By the late 17th century, the empire was a shadow of its former self. The silver fleets were smaller and often captured or sunk by enemies. The crown was permanently in debt. The rise of England, France, and the Dutch Republic would fill that void that Spain left behind. Spain's bankruptcies remind us of the power that is built on just credit. Even with the oceans of silver that Spain was getting, it couldn't last forever. The glittering empire had ruled half the world, but it could not rule its own balance sheet.
News from Washington, D.C. The U.S. national debt has officially surpassed $37 trillion for the first time in history.
So now that you've heard about Spain and what happened to it, what if I told you that today, August 13th, 2025, the US has reached $37 trillion of debt? Are we a nation that is built on this idea of credit? We are spending faster than ever before this year. And under the Trump regime, it's only accelerating even faster. What if we are just an empire that's built on credit? Sooner or later, we're going to default. And just like Spain, we'll be able to maybe take our short term debt and change it into long term debt. But creditors are going to remember. Foreign nations, they're going to know. And then when we have to borrow again, they're going to demand more from us. And it's going to keep happening. They will default, then they'll demand more from us. We'll default, and they'll demand more than us. Recently, I've seen a lot of people on the internet talking about this idea that we could restructure our debt, and Trump is planning on doing this. But we see that even Spain tried to restructure their debt, but all it did was make things worse. So, as the richest nation in the world, what are we really getting for all this debt? This has been the Continuum. Thank you for listening.